Federal deficit is shrinking, but it's still over $600 billion, and the year ain't done yet. And the media is jumping on the news saying, hey, how great this is, but forget the headlines and read the fine print. We're already taxing way more, and now Democrats are pushing to spend more. To Dee Banky, who just can't stand anymore, Gretchen Hamel and Jonas Max Ferris are back with us as well. So what's your beef with this? I mean, everything seems to be working out pretty well.
Oh, well, I'm the one who can't stand it. No, I think it's bad for all Americans. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars. I mean, we have so much debt. And it's like a kid that's got all this money in his pocket, burning a hole in his pocket. He owes, $15,000 per car, but he can't keep the money in his pocket. He's got to go ahead and spend it. You know, and that's what's happening. Congress and D.C., they're acting like children.
But the thing, though, Jonas, is I guess this particular kid's got this thing called the ability to either print money or tax money or whatever. They just think the money is unlimited.
This kid can use his monopoly money to buy a car, and I don't see why that would be a bad thing to do if you were a kid, if you had the access to that kind of spending, which is true. We get to spend $85 billion a month. It didn't exist the month before, and it so far has worked out really well. We've had no inflation, so you can't complain about that. As far as this huge multi-$100 billion deficit, that's not going to close unless the president goes fully back to the Clinton-era tax policy and doesn't just return high brackets for wealthy people. He has to return the brackets for everybody down to $1 and child care credit, etc., unless we have major spending. Since we're not going to have major spending cuts, we might have spending increases, then we are going to need higher taxes on the lower end of the income scale.
Gretchen, I don't know if you were able to follow all of that, but essentially it sounds like Jonas is saying we need more taxes.
Yeah, can you believe that? And let's put this deficit into context. This is the fifth largest deficit that we've had in our nation's history, only to be followed by the 4 preceding years where we've had $1 trillion deficit. So this is nothing to brag about, and it doesn't mean that we need to spend more or doesn't mean that we need to tax more. Since the fiscal cliff deal, we've seen individual taxes raised by 17%, and we've seen payroll taxes increase by 11%. The last thing we need, especially in this economy, is more taxing.
You know, Dee, that's a great point, because I got to tell you something. Everyone got a tax hike, despite the fact that most people were promised they wouldn't. Everyone got a tax hike this year, everyone at least who has a job. And we've seen this economy. The best we've grown, I think, is less than 2%, 1.9%. I mean, there's something to be said about these extraordinarily high taxes, regulations, and spending that just don't help the overall economy.
Yeah, Gretchen's exactly right. I mean, that is the last thing we need are taxes, Jonah. I mean, if you want to pay more taxes, that's fine. But
you left off the last S for savings, but keep going.
Oh, okay, Jonas. But for businesses to grow, I mean, it just hasn't happened during the Obama administration at all. Think about it. We're in the 5th year. There's no growth. And then we want to tax Americans to death. I mean, it's just not working, obviously. So let's try to change. And I don't know, maybe cut some spending instead of trying to add taxes and add the so-called revenue.
Right. Jonas, the last S for spending. Listen. Realistically, Jonas, when I see these numbers like $600 billion and I see the media going crazy like the deficit's coming down, I cringe because I know that's the green light to D.C. to keep doing more of the same stuff that really doesn't work.
Well, they did cut spending. I mean, they didn't want to do it, but spending got cut a little this year and taxes.
Oh, by the way, I'm glad you brought that up.
Because they didn't have a choice.
They didn't have a choice, Gretchen.
It's why the deficit is smaller than it was a year ago. You said the deficit was higher in years before because now we have higher taxes and less spending, relative speaking.
And the spending part, though, don't you think no one's touting that part? That the part about sequestration that's actually working. We never hear about that in the media
because they don't want to cut the spending anymore is the main reason. But that worked as much as the tax increases. They both work to close the deficit. And your point before that we've had the highest deficits for the last few years in history because we've had the lowest tax revenues, tax rates over the last decades in this nation's history since they started raising taxes before Eisenhower.
Gretchen?
It is the tax rates.
Let me add this, please. Okay, let's start off with the administration wants it both ways. They want to tout that they have a low deficit, but at the same time they want to talk about how sequester is bad and it's bad for the economy because they want to be spending more money. The reason that we have $1 trillion deficit is because we've had these big government policies trying to quote-unquote stimulate the economy through spending billions and billions of dollars that did nothing to stimulate the economy but to get us to the exact same point that we were just a few years, except for the fact that we have we have some of the lowest participation rate in the last 3 decades, and we had 37,000 individuals drop out of the participation rate in July alone. This is not working
But the
as
average
it is,
American
and something
family
needs to change.
pays a single-digit income tax rate. When in our history was that the case, where just half the country paid a single-digit or lower
Because
income
nobody
tax rate?
is working, because the economy is shrinking and it's doing nothing for the families
It's not,
because
first of
nobody
all,
is
the
working like
economy
they
is
used
not
to.
shrinking. It hasn't been shrinking since the recession, which is what's shrinking.
Okay, you're right. You're
Well,
right.
he's
You're right. It's been less than 2% of
Describing the
growth, so
economy.
it's okay.
And that's a
okay.
faster growth rate than most major economies except China, is it not?
No, well, that's listen, we're talking about comparing America to countries that accepted socialism 20 years before we did. Not a good comparison. Might be a great warning for us, but you get the last word.
I'm just saying Gretchen's absolutely right. Jonas is wrong.
Oh, the economy's shrinking. I was wrong about
Look,
that.
the economy's in terrible shape, and we're going
But
to
is it growing? It's not growing. Okay, the economy's not growing.
It's going downhill. I mean, the job situation is terrible. Our country, I mean, we're going to end up like
What
Greece.
data point is actually worse than
We're
5
going to
years
end up
ago
like Greece
on
when
the
we get our
economy?
deficit under
Name
control.
one major
the
economic
deficit is
unemployment
taking us
rate,
into the abyss.
filing for
Do you think
unemployment.
Well, I tell you what, guys, we got to leave it here.
Name
But
a data point.
I will
It's
say
worse.
this: we're not growing at our potential, and I think we all could agree on
Thank
that.
you.
It could
Great
be a
show,
lot better.
folks. Thank you for watching.